to Teachers Talk Radio. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday's Late Show with me, Hannah Wilson. Just a reminder that tonight we've got our amazing sponsors. Our first one is John Catt. We have reunited with them. So this short show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational. They're publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. So don't miss out on levelling up your professional development today, and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. And you can also use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. So happy reading. We also are sponsored by Reading Solutions UK, who are you looking for your best practice and innovative strategies to foster confident lifelong readers? Join their free online international reading conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. And you can hear from speakers like TV personalities and educational expert Basit Siddiqui and beloved children's author Michael Rosen and the National Literacy Trust's Irene Picton. Throughout the 3 days conference, speakers will explore a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk to grab your free ticket. And we're also sponsored by Easy For You, empowering education with Easy For You, where innovation meets accessibility. Their subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionises the way learning is experienced. By eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology, Easy For You isn't just providing tools, but they are shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy For You, transforming education one device at a time. So find out more from them at easyforyou.school. And Nathan's lovely tagging all of these along the top. So if you want to find out any more of those, you can have a look at any of the posts above. So thank you for joining me tonight. If you want to come in and have a chat and talk to me live, then do feel free to press the request to speak button, and we'll link you up so you can come and have a chat. So tonight, I'm an art teacher, as most of you know, and I have found the last few years has this whole new JCQ rule of having to give the students their raw marks has really developed quite a lot, and has become almost quite a stressful situation for both teachers and students. I did actually email JCQ to see whether they would comment or maybe even join me on the show and have a discussion about it, but unfortunately I haven't heard back from them. So it is going to be mainly us chatting about it. But it just seems to be one of those things that is quite a stressful process, and also quite a lot of confusion, and it's not something that is generally chatted about in terms of what we need to do when, and there seems to be this really clear idea of what's going on. In terms of how it goes. So I know a lot of subjects will have their coursework. They might have to give them their raw marks in the same way. But it does seem to be that obviously with art being mostly both the coursework and the exam unit, we have to give them both. So, and it seems to be quite difficult in terms of what we do and how we do it. Everyone seems to be doing a slightly different process as well. I work as a moderator for one of the exam boards. I'm an advisor on another one, and I'm helping write the scheme for another. So I know majority of the exam boards pretty well. And my niece even gave me, she was like, I got 175 out of 200. And I was like, oh, that's really good. But I didn't think you were OCR. I thought you were AQA. And she's like, I am AQA. And I'm like, that's not out of 200. So how have you got that mark? And she's like, can you tell me what grade it is, because I don't know what it is, but you're an art teacher, so you'd be able to tell me. I'm like, I don't know how they've got to that mark, so I don't know. And that's the difficult thing, is it's almost like you're almost giving them this mark, but essentially they've still got to be moderated, so they could be moved up or down. Then we've got to find out the grade boundaries in August. So we're giving them these marks in kind of May, June time. Well, May really for majority of people. I think there's one exam board you have to do it 2 weeks before they moderate. So there's a couple that might still be going through the process now, but the majority of us have given them to them. And it's kind of that weird thing that you can't tell them what they mean, what they actually kind of equate to, because you don't know whether they're going to go up or down. You don't know what the grade boundaries are going to do. Are they going to stick relatively similar? Are they going to go back to 2019? Are they going to go up? Are they going to go down? And it then leads to these kids Googling stuff and trying to find grade boundaries, and then be like, then they kind of clock and go, actually, what exam board are we? And trying to work it out. But I feel a bit sorry for them, because then they're trying to work it out. But then if you end up in that conversation with them of going, well, it should be this, but I can't promise you that, because then you'll end up with parents complaining, like, well, you told them they gave them their mark and they didn't get that. So, and then it backfires on you. And then you've also got that whole thing of kids going home, or kids chatting to their friends and be like, oh my gosh, they got more than me. And then going home and telling their parents and getting upset, and then parents complaining, and then wanting to dispute the marks and then have them remarked. But it's that whole process. Again, it's trying to explain to them, you need to say that you're arguing the process of how it's been marked, and that it's out of rank order within the people of the class. But do they actually know how it's been marked and how it is? Because let's face it, we've probably the whole way along been like, you haven't done this or this, but potentially the students aren't taking that feedback on board. And especially with the 4 different assessment objectives, you can have the most amazing drawer in the world, but if they're not going through the journey and the process and experimentation, they're not going to get those really high marks. So it's really difficult to try and explain that to parents. And I think there were some people commenting as well about how it's kind of almost ruins that last kind of few lessons that you have with these year 11s or year 13s, where you've built up these really great relationships, and then suddenly you're having to give them these marks and kind of potentially upset them in this bit before they're kind of ready. Whereas I feel like in the summer, when they open it with everybody else, it's more this kind of, it's more understandable because you see it across the board rather than this is just one subject early on. And it's same as kind of with that in terms of when they kind of compare to their friends and things and thinking about what's going on, maybe chatting to people that have done it on previous years. And obviously everything changes with each year. If some schools give it for their coursework and their exam marks, so it's kind of understanding the percentages of how that's divided up. So it's very kind of different in terms of how schools are delivering it. But I don't think there's like a clear explanation really of how we're meant to do it, because it is one of those. Where does it need to come from? Does it need to come from JCQ and they need to make it more specific per subject, or do the exam boards need to kind of let us know more about what we need to do in terms of giving the students their marks so that we're all following the same process for that exam board? And in that respect as well, it's like the same as how long do you give them? I believe JCQ now have put in this year that it should be 5 days, but I remember the year before last being on a standardisation day and asking, and they said it can be 24 hours, which again, it's quite doesn't really give the kids a lot of time for it to sink in and decide and change their mind. But also this is all coming in at a point where the kids kind of disappear and start going for boosters and going for their exams, so you end up kind of traipsing around the school trying to find that kid that hasn't been in your lesson, or the kids that have decided that they're done and not coming to school and definitely not coming to your lesson. So then it becomes more of an admin task of running around and trying to find the kids that you need to inform of their marks. And again, it's one of those that is verbally okay, or doesn't need to be formally written, doesn't need to go to parents, can it just go to students? It's really kind of quite difficult. And I think as teachers, this is something, our workload is massive at the moment. Do we need this on top of it? It's quite a tricky one. It's not delivered well in terms of what we need to do. But if anybody, like I said, does want to pop on and chat about this, do just prop the invitation to speak. If you'd like a request to speak, you're more than welcome to come on and chat about this, because I'd love to hear about people's experiences. I know that currently NSEAD are looking at trying to get this changed, and they've done a little survey so people can pop onto Facebook and find that and fill that in if they want to, because they're trying to get a bit more of a picture about it. So it'd certainly be interesting to see what people are making of it as a whole. I've seen a couple of people kind of understanding it and kind of saying, because it is important, I guess, that they have that opportunity to dispute their marks and how the centre is doing that and delivering it. But again, it's one of those that are the students understanding what it is that they're kind of saying that that isn't being done properly, that kind of thing. It's really difficult to kind of understand what they're being given and what it all means, and what they're disputing, if they are disputing it. It does feel as well, I don't know whether it's just because people are mentioning it more, that a lot more people are having students request that they are remarked at a later date and having that option of kind of having to do that. There certainly seems to be more people going, oh, I haven't ever had anybody do this before. This is the first time I've ever had anybody ask for this to be done. And it seems to be that, again, having to then find somebody in a very busy corner of the kind of year to find someone to then be able to go through this is quite difficult. So I'm going to have a little read of some of the what the JCQ actually says, and then we'll have a chat about kind of how people kind of determine that and what they think of it, and hopefully we'll have some people on as well to chat about it. It's one of those, I saved it onto my phone, I transferred it onto my laptop, and they're all coming up tiny and I can't read the writing. But we'll have a look at some of those. So there is guidance. The main one that people need to look for is informing candidates of their centre assessed marks. It is quite hard to kind of locate. I think it's in, if I remember rightly, there are kind of lots of different areas. So it is one of those, again, that you probably might want to speak to your exams officer and find it off. They might be able to find it for you in terms of doing that. But it is one of those that kind of, it's an extra thing, isn't it? When we've already got quite a lot to do as kind of art teachers, getting everything done before the actual exams start, or as I actually heard a teacher say, going, your proper exams will start on this date. And I'm like, hang on, ours are on this week. What are you talking about? It's still a proper exam, which did rile me up a little bit. But it is one of those. It's something that other subjects don't kind of seem to be affected in the same way as what we are, which is a bit of a shame, really, because it kind of, like I said, it tarnishes that last bit of your time with your students, really, because we don't want them to leave in a negative way. We want it to be a positive way, and it should be a positive thing for teachers as well as kind of students, and it shouldn't be this kind of negative thing to end the year on. And it's just, like I said, just a real shame that they're kind of ending that way the year. Right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my phone. So I hope you can still hear me when I read these out. But it is, like I said, just one of those that it seems to be kind of quite difficult in terms of clarification. So does the requirement to inform candidates of their centre marks apply to qualifications other than GCSEs and A-levels? So obviously we must have a written internal appeal process. So quite a lot of the schools as well generally seems to be that they don't have an internal appeals procedure written down. That should be something within schools. So if a kid does appeal, you should be able to go to your SLT or exams officer, and it's for them to deal with, as opposed to us. Generally seems to be the consensus, although that generally does seem to fall on us. But they should have a detailed process written out. So it might be one of those that actually, once these year 11s are done, you need to go to your SLT and check what their process is. Do we have one, so that we've got it ready for next year, so that these kind of things don't happen, or if they do happen, we're ready for it. You also, so there are other ones, like I said, the English language and things, I believe is they might have be given theirs, but we seem to be the only one that is 100% internally assessed. So art and design, which 100% internally, must candidates be given their mark for all internally assessed components. So yes, art and design, along with other subjects, must have more than one internally assessed component. Candidates must be given all their marks and can request a review of one or more of their marks. So for me, that's quite kind of almost vague, because when it says giving them all their marks, so is that for their coursework and their external marks? Is it the marks for their each assessment? But they can dispute one or instead of or the other, or they can dispute both. It's kind of quite vague in that respect in terms of what it is. So then it goes on to say, does the requirement to inform candidates of their centre marks apply in those? So again, they must be given them in all of those and review one or more of those marks. So they could dispute either. What should a centre do if a challenged about a candidate's marks? So in the first instance, the centre should follow its published internal appeals process. So like I said before, we probably all need to know whether our school actually has an internal appeal process and what the arrangements are. So this must be set out. Its arrangement for conduct a review of internally assessed marks. The outcome of the review should determine the marks to be submitted to the awarding body. The principle should be that the marks in the centre submits to the awards body have been internally standardised, and then will enable the awards body moderation process to be undertaken successfully. And I think that's what's quite difficult about this, is that as professionals in our subjects, we know what we're doing, we know what we're talking about. We go on standardisation. The thing with standardisation is, though, however, that generally there's only 2 places per school, and some schools will do more than 2 endorsements. So I'll have more than 2 art teachers. So my old school did art, photography, and we had 2 photography groups, textiles and 3D design. So we had 4 endorsements, 5 GCSE classes. So we had far more than 2 teachers. We had 4 teachers teaching those because we had lots of part-time staff. But that just meant we had to take it in terms to go to the standardisation. So for starters, in that respect, although we're very good at our jobs and we're all very professional, we don't necessarily all get to go on the standardisation. If we can, grab one of those 2 places. B, if you can find one in your area. I'm in Norfolk and my nearest one is generally Cambridge each year, so that's quite a trek for me to go. It's a good few hours, or I can go all the way down to London. So they tend to be quite far away. They are online ones more popping up. But having tried both, I do feel like there's a lot to be said physically being able to go through the sketchbooks in person and physically look at the work in person next to each other. And then also see, you've got the schools, haven't you? Schools are very reluctant to let people out. I know I've spoken to schools recently where it's like, oh, we weren't allowed to go, or they'll let one of you go. But actually, it's really good as a department to go on the same day and do it together, so you know what you're doing, so you can go back and moderate in your school. If you're going and kind of doing moderation events and then you're coming back and marking your work, to that standardisation materials. You're checking the materials and comparing the students' work to that materials and all the wording. There's lots of different wordings. I think the wording has got much better in the last few years in terms of how exam boards are doing it. I know AQA released their spider diagrams and kind of their criteria for each section before you then go into the clearly, moderately, and looking at those sections. So it is much easier to mark, and there's clearer criteria for that. But generally, as a whole, we don't give students that criteria. So it is one of those, I think somebody suggested actually giving the marking criteria to the students and be like, this is what we marked with, this is what we gave you, this is what you're disputing. And saying, but then again, we go through all of that training to then have kids or parents and say, we don't agree that you're correct. We don't think you've given the correct mark. We don't think you've marked correctly. If we've been on that standardisation, maybe that needs to be compulsory so that people are allowed out to it. Then they shouldn't be allowed to dispute the marks. If we've been on the training and marked to that specification, then surely we should be credited as professionals in our own right, having been through that training, done what we need to do, followed all of the training that we've been given, and quite often marked within our department. So marking across multiple people, that shows that we really kind of know what we're talking about. We've discussed it. It's a long process. And any schools that do not get the day off to do it, I really feel for you. And if you then get the appeal, I think you then need to really go to your SLT and explain, like, we're probably getting these appeals because we aren't having the time to properly do this. If you're not laying it out and looking at them all together, that's going to really cause you issues in terms of moderating as well. And if it's disjointed, I remember meeting somebody a couple of years ago, and they were like had lots of people off. Their school wouldn't give them time to mark, and they were having to take them home in bundles to mark in the evenings and then bring them back into school, which they shouldn't be doing, because then everything needs to be in school and should be locked away and secure. But it's just the fact that if your school isn't giving you that time to really kind of spend on it and moderate it properly, then maybe that might end up being an appeal. But if you're going to the moderation centre, you're going through the training, you are working as a team, as a department, or maybe even across a trust and doing training together and marking that work, then there shouldn't really be a place for those students to dispute it, because it almost, they're arguing with your professionalism, your professional judgment. And I think that's also one of those things that lately that is, I think, media-wise, we as teachers get quite a negative impact in the media. We don't get a nice shiny light on how well we do, really, do we? And I think that also can come into it in the fact that people are discrediting teachers a lot more, that we don't know what we're doing. You've been unfair. Our child has not been kind of told the right things at the right times. And actually, we are really good at our jobs, and we probably have told them 10, 20 times, but they've not listened. And there should be something that means that we as professionals are kind of, our word is taken for. It actually means something in the process. So you've got that side of it in terms of the fact that these judgments are kind of being affected in terms of moderation, whether you've been on it and whether you're being allowed to go out to it. Important is quite important. But also it's that fact that the kids haven't been through that training. The kids don't know the process, the lengthy process that we go to mark. I actually try and explain to it when they've got cover and I'm like, right, I'm marking all your work, especially if you do it before Christmas or and then do the each. I know that there's a move more recently in exam boards in terms of marking it all together, so marking it quite holistically, all coursework, exam, in rank order, as opposed to being separate. But again, that's a lot to get through. So a lot of people will mark the coursework and then mark the exam. But I explained to them the process, like, we are going to lie them all out, we're going to rank them, we're going to go again, look at the exam stuff. Or when I'm not teaching you today because I'm going to standardisation, where I go and I look at all of the work that the exam board has had. We go around, we mark it, and then we check our marks against the exam marks to check that we're right. I mean, there's a whole nother debate to be had on when we go to those moderation things. There's always a sample, isn't there, that's thrown in that nobody agrees with, and everyone's like, how on earth did that get a 9? Which I feel makes the process even more difficult. I feel like sometimes the moderation samples that we go and have a look at and practice on standardization should be really clearly how they've hit every assessment objective. There shouldn't be any argument, queries. I think also it's that one, isn't it, where they take them from different schools, so therefore the different levels, they're all within the tolerance, but actually there's a grade between those 5 marks. And also that idea of also when you're marking in a school, you put all the different endorsements separately. When you go to a standardization, you have textiles next to photography, next to art. And actually, would that make it easier if we actually had the standardization split into the different endorsements? But that's a whole nother debate. I digress. But it is that thing that if they are kind of challenging it, you have to go to the SLT, and the centres should have clear communications on how they need to get it reviewed. So JCQ says centres must publish and communicate clear deadlines for candidates who submit a request for a review of the centre marks before the date of submitting the marks to the awarding body. So that obviously you've got to give them the marks in time, and you've got to give them a deadline of when they've got to let you know, and you've got to allow yourself enough time to then still get everything in on the website. So what materials should the centre make available to candidates so that they can decide whether to proceed with a request for a review or an internal assessment? So generally, copies of the marked assessment materials and the mark scheme or assessment criteria should be made available as a minimum. Additional materials may vary from subject to subject. For some marked assessment materials, such as art, work and recordings, it may be more appropriate for them to be shared under supervised conditions. So again, I've heard kind of different things from what different schools are doing. Obviously the mark scheme would be given, so your marking grid in terms of the assessment objectives. I don't generally hear of anybody giving them the spider diagrams and things like that, but that might be something that's worth giving to them in terms of, I think the wording on that is slightly easier for them to understand, but the wording on the marking criteria is quite difficult. It's not kind of clear. Getting students to understand what the difference between highly developed and consistent ability, it's quite, unless you've physically been to the training, that's quite hard for them to understand. So it may be appropriate for them to be shared under supervised conditions, so you can allow them to revisit and re-look at their books. I think somebody said that they put theirs in rank order, so they put out their book and the books either side, so they get to look at them and see whether they agree still where they are in terms of their ranking. Because I think that's the thing, out of context on its own, they can believe that theirs is better than other people. But again, it's one of those, unless they understand the assessment objectives, are they kind of really understanding what it is that they're doing? Then we've got what constitutes sufficient time for a candidate to study copies of materials and decide whether she wishes to request a review of the mark awarded by the centre. So centres should normally allow at least 5 working days. So that definitely wasn't in there previously. That's a new thing that's been in, I don't know, this year or last year, but I definitely remember previously looking and being told that it was about 24 hours. But obviously that's extended to 5 working days. This may vary depending on, for example, the subject, the size of the cohort, and the number of subject teachers at the centre. Centres should provide a clear deadline to candidates which takes into account the time it would take to review any marks and submit the final marks to the awarding body by the published deadline. Candidates must not be allowed to access the original assessment material, including artefacts, unless supervised. So again, question 6 says, additional materials may vary from subject to subject. For some marked assessment materials, such as artworks, recordings, it may be appropriate for them to be shared under supervision. It also says that generally copies of the marked assessment materials and mark schemes assessment criteria should be made available. But the next one is like that candidates must not be allowed access to the original assessment materials. So for art and design especially, it just doesn't make sense. So are you allowed to give it to them? Aren't you? You've literally contradicted yourselves, JCQ, on 2 questions back to back. So we can understand why there's so much confusion on this.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.
Empowering education with Easy4U, where innovation meets accessibility. Our subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionizes the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. We're not just providing tools, we're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy4U, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easy4u.school.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Reading Solutions UK. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. Hear from speakers like TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, beloved children's author Michael Rosen, fluency expert Tim Rosinski, EEF specialist Chloe Butlin, the National Literacy Trust's Irene Picton, and a range of experienced practitioners, including MAT leaders, deputy heads, heads of English, high-level teaching assistants, and school librarians. Through the 3-day conference, speakers will explore a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk for more information and to sign up for this free conference.
Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Can a candidate only request a review of an internally assessed mark if he/she identifies an issue or issues? So centres should inform candidates they will need to explain on what grounds they wish to request a review of an internally assessed mark. Centres may wish to rule out complaints regarding the quality of the teaching, since the review will focus on the quality of the work submitted. Having reviewed the copies of materials made available to him/her, the candidate will need to explain what he or she believes to be the issue. It is likely that the candidate who requests the review will believe that their marks they have been awarded do not give them sufficient credit for meeting the published assessment criteria. Generally, candidates are unlikely to request a review on the grounds that their mark is not in line with the standards set by the centre. The purpose of giving candidates the assessment criteria is to enable them to evaluate whether the criteria has been correctly applied. It is important that the candidates understand that the moderation process carried out by the awarding body may result in mark change, either upwards or downwards, even in an internal review. The internal review process is in place to ensure consistency of marking within the centre. Moderation by the awarding body ensures that the centre mark is in line with national standards. The mark submitted to the awarding body is subject to change and therefore should be considered provisional. So again, we've got that difficult thing with that of the fact that we are kind of giving that idea to the students that they can review it. So hopefully by adding kind of that concept to it, that you can discuss it and kind of talk about it, with the students and explain that they're kind of, although they've got to appeal, if they think their mark is wrong, they've got to say exactly where it's wrong and exactly how they've marked it wrong. So hopefully, if you're explaining to your students in a really positive way the process that you're doing, and I would quite often recommend writing it in that letter. So I write mine into a letter explaining the process that we've used for moderation, and then give them their mark and then the deadline and stuff for wanting to dispute it. But I think it's really important that it is clear. They're not just going, oh, well, that doesn't get me a 4. Not that they know what a 4 is, because we don't know what the grade boundaries are. I love this guessing game that is kind of art and design. We're then going to get moderated, so they might not even be those marks anyway. And then we're going to get marked for... then we're going to get the grade boundaries, so they might be different. So it might not even be that anyway. I would be really intrigued to know, I don't know whether there's enough data on this, because I don't know how many people get reviewed, but I imagine there'll be more for some reason this year, whether if anybody's reviewed a student's work and changed their grade, if they then be moderated and then been out of tolerance. Because essentially that can affect everybody in the whole entire class. So moderation, the moderator comes in and will mark the sample. They'll mark 5 above or 5 below. If they're out of that tolerance, then they'll mark the next lot. And if you're consistently out, then they'll change the marks if there's a pattern. So it could essentially trigger for more students to either be then marked down or higher if they're changed. And I think there's in that wording as well is that idea that potentially their mark could be down. And I very much emphasize that to my students. Like, if you dispute this and decide you want it to get remarked, then potentially you are going at that risk of whether it will get marked. It could potentially be marked down and lowered. For my old trust, we had, was it my old trust? Well, when this first came about, me and another teacher that I did my teacher training with, she works at a school down the road from me. We basically would message each other and be like, if I have any kids dispute my marks, will you mark them? And she would be like, if any kids dispute mine, will you mark them? And we'd kind of basically, we had a date set up. I think it was always like a day or two after the deadline for the marks to be submitted. And we'd be like, right, okay, on that day, if we have anything, we both block out that evening to be free. So if worst case, we have it all planned in to swap books, go and have a look at each other's and sort it out. Luckily, we never actually got to that point, but we always had it in place just in case. And again, that might be useful. When I was at my old trust, we had an internal thing that if we had an issue, then somebody, kind of one of the trust leads for that subject, would review it. Potentially, it might be kind of a Teams flicking through and showing the book, depending on how good your cameras are. If it's photography, you can send it. And having somebody within the trust look at it, and having somebody that, again, you can be like my trust lead. But I think it is one of those that if you have that trust and you have that opportunity to go on moderation training within your trust and kind of compare each other's work across the trust. We did that before we started our standardisation process. So not only can we say we standardise within our department, but we also standardise within our trust. Everybody in the trust took 5 books from varying different grades, and we all laid them out together and mixed them across kind of the 7-8 schools that attended and marked them against each other. And we would say pros and cons of each one, whether we'd move them up and down. And it just meant that we were all kind of there. And I think there was decades worth of experience in that room between us. But it is one of those, art is subjective. People are always going to think something's more clever than it is, or something's drawn better than perhaps it is. And it is really difficult. But that's why we have the tolerance. That's why we had the plus and negative 5 in terms of how we do it. But it's a shame that, again, like I said, that we're not kind of almost taken seriously in this practice of how we mark in terms of that. Right, what have I got left? I'm always at the bottom of the questions. I've lost one. Oh, where's number 9? Okay, so I think I did that one. Yeah, so we talked about whether they can review an internal assessment, and that it's important that they understand the moderation process and the fact they could go up or down. This one's quite an interesting one. I think this was happening more last year or the year before. I've definitely seen some people online mention it. Can a centre charge candidates for an internal review? So this is entirely at the discretion of the centre and may potentially align with any other centre policies on charging for services such as clerical checks and review of award body marks. So I found this really interesting because I was reading through old comments about this process, and there was a couple of people that said, yes, we charge, if they want it remarked, we charge them this because we've got to take time off timetable, we've got to get cover, we've got to take it to another school to get reviewed, and that costs us the school money. So if they want to get it reviewed, if they're that passionate about it, then they need to pay for the cover to be able to get that to happen. But somebody else pointed out that actually doing that process means that it is going to cost the students, and it might be our pupil premium or our free school meal students might not have the money to dispute it, so therefore it might be more of a students that come from affluent backgrounds that are more likely to appeal. So I do see that side, but I also see that would be a massive deterrent. I can imagine some parents being less likely to appeal if they have to pay for it. But I also remember back in the day getting marked down after changing schools, and the moderation report was awful in the fact that it said about the printer paper quality, and I was like, you can't mention that. So there were quite interesting comments that were put on it. And my school said I wanted to. It was that. Do you remember that year where quite a lot of centres got marked down because they were changing the way it was got marked? I remember people online being like, "I've marked for 20 years and never been marked down, and this is the year I've been marked down." And that was the year that mine did. But because I had a lead moderator come in with the moderator, my school went, "Oh no, we won't dispute that," because they didn't want to pay for it. But all the other schools that I moderated with, that looked and standardised with and looked at mine and agreed with my marks, they disputed theirs and theirs went back up. So I was a bit like, oh, I wish my school had paid for that to get them remarked. And I guess it is that issue that, and again, I had a parent that said, can we get them remarked? My child missed therefore by 1 mark, so they didn't get into the college to do what they wanted to do. But then you have to get the whole cohort remarked as opposed to one student. So is it that we actually need to make it that this is more of a flip the process? So rather than giving them all their marks at this point and then changing and then getting them moderated, getting the grade boundaries, and then if they do, we have to remoderate the whole thing. Should they be allowed to question their mark after they get results, and we just moderate the ones that question their marks and they get remarked? Surely that's just a much more simpler process. Who knows? Like I said, if you want to call in and have a chat about this, you're more than welcome. Or if you want to add in a comment below and I'll read it out, that's fine. And just a reminder that we've got 3 lovely sponsors of our shows. We've got John Catt Educational, who are publishers of professional development books, and they've been one of our sponsors for a really long time. They've got some great, amazing books, and they're pumping out some really good ones. I'm loving reading them for part of my masters and my professional development. So if you're interested in that, pop over to johncattbookshop.com, and we've got the amazing code of JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. We're also currently being sponsored by Reading Solutions UK. They have got an amazing reading conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. They've got personalities like Michael Rosen on there, who I had the delight of meeting at the BET conference whilst dressed as a giant radio for TTR, and is just the most lovely human being. So definitely worth getting involved in that conference, and you can get your free ticket from readingsolutionsuk.co.uk. And we've got Easy For You, who are empowering education with Easy For You, where innovation meets accessibility. So they've got a subscription-based offering, not only equipment with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionising the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. So you can find out more at www.easyforyou.school. So we've got some amazing sponsors there. And And we've got a lovely show on Wednesday at 8, which is tackling digital poverty and promoting digital literacy. So do pencil that one in if you want to learn more about kind of digital stuff. And I think, to be honest, as a photography teacher as well, we're kind of one of the leading ones. I certainly feel like I fill the gap. The kids that come to me since moving to digital PowerPoints and learn how to use Teams or Google Classroom and do digital PowerPoints have massively increased their digital literacy. Like, I feel like I have to teach them more than what they've learned before to be able to run the course sufficiently. And I think digital literacy is just so important. So it's definitely worth a listen over there. Right, we've got a couple more. So we've got JCQ also say, so should the review be of the mark awarded or the process leading to the mark being awarded? So this is the complicated bit, which people quite often debate. So the review should be of the mark that has been awarded, confirming whether the candidate's mark is in line with the standards set for the other candidates at the centre. The following will be reviewed: the candidate's work, where the evidence of this is, for example, in drama or music, then the recording of the work should be given to the reviewer. The mark sheet completed by the teacher, which usually shows the breakdown of the marks per assessment objectives or section of the mark scheme, and information regarding the internal standardisation to ascertain whether consistent standards were applied by the original marker to the candidate's work, and any comments, annotations made by the teacher during the marking process. So I guess that's on that form. We generally mark, like, if you want to, you can put comments on there before the assessors. So we are giving that. I still don't feel like that massively clears up the idea of whether it's them arguing the mark awarded or the process. But I guess you're kind of you need to show them both to make sure that they're certain about what they're questioning. Who should conduct the review of an internal assessed mark? Where a candidate requests one. The review must be conducted by an assessor who is an appropriate competency and has no previous involvement in the assessment of that candidate for the component in question and has no personal interest in the outcome of the review. This should either be another teacher within the centre or a teacher from another centre. However, the centre would need to assure that the reviewer has declared any conflict of interest prior to undertaking the review. It is acceptable for a teacher who has been internally standardised to review the work of a candidate marked by another teacher within the same centre. So that's quite it is acceptable for a teacher who has been internally standardised to review the work of a candidate marked by another teacher within the same centre. However, if the candidate's work was part of the centre's internal standardisation process, it would not be possible for the teacher who participated in the internal standardisation process to then review the candidate's work. For larger centres, internal standardisation arrangement could be enable different subgroups of teachers to mark, standardise and conduct any reviews on matrix arrangement. So it almost feels like you kind of need to leave one person out of the process to make life easy. If you go, right, Joe Bloggs over there, she's not allowed in the standardisations, she's our backup. In case anybody disputes the marks, then that teacher marks them. Which again seems a little bit counterproductive. Surely having that extra person involved in the internal standardisation is going to make it better and fairer for those students. But essentially, otherwise, it means you can pick anybody really that hasn't been involved in the standardisation within your school or your trust to be able to mark that. So it is a bit kind of unclear, and it almost feels like it's there to be fair, but it is kind of a little bit woolly in terms of what you need to do. So again, we've got, will outsourcing the review of an internally assessed mark breach the confidentiality of assessment materials and candidate data? That says no. Then what have we got? How should the review be conducted? So different approaches may be equally valid. Depending on the subject, however, the task of the reviewer does not vary. It is important that the reviewer is provided with some materials for the centre's internal standardisation process that took place prior to releasing marks to candidates, as well as the work that is under review. Centres will need to ensure that they retain internal standardisation materials for this purpose. The reviewer would need to see the candidate's work, the internal assessor's mark sheet, and any additional comments that demonstrate why certain marks were awarded. So it almost feels like we have to write some comments on this to kind of justify ourselves to help support us, which will just make the process a lot longer. These must be considered within the context of the internal standardisation materials provided to ensure the consistent approach to other candidates in the centre where there was no internal standardisation carried out because there was only one teacher involved in the marking component. Working out candidates in a cohort must be considered to ensure that judgments can be made on the consistency standards. It is recommended that review takes place at the candidate centre to maintain integrity of the work and ensure secure storage. If the review must take place remotely, then the original material should be held at the centre, with the reviewer being provided with copies of the candidate's work. Once the centre has informed the candidate of their mark, the centre assessed components unit, it must be made clear to the reviewer, the teacher, and the candidate that no one is permitted to alter the work. The reviewer must provide a reason for upholding or changing the mark awarded by the centre. This can be a brief annotation on the recording form showing the review's breakdown of the marks per assessment objectives, and the centre must inform the candidate in writing of the outcome of the review. It should also be logged and brought to the attention of the head centre. The written records must be made available to the awarding body on request. The centre must inform the awarding body if it does not accept the outcome of the review. So it's, again, this is like quite a difficult one. It's a complicated one. If a moderator comes in and marks your work, and they're allowed a 5-mark tolerance either side, so plus or minus, as long as you're 5 marks above or 5 marks below the person that you're moderating's work, then that mark will stand. So if we're sending them off for review, and surely there should be some process in that if they're 5 above or 5 below your marks, the mark you gave should stand. It shouldn't be that suddenly someone comes in and say, actually, that's worth 4 marks higher or 4 marks lower. That's what they're going to get, because art is subjective. So therefore, we're kind of, the thing that everything is based on when it comes to moderation is not really brought into the process of reviewing. Surely it should be that they need to make sure that the review work, if it is reviewed, that it's only changed if it's out of tolerance. Or am I wrong? Feel free to comment or call in and have a chat. Is that my mind making things more complicated, or would that be fairer? It just seems that, again, somebody can come in and go, that needs to be more, that needs to be less. But we could be talking 1 or 2 marks, but then those 1 or 2 marks could equate to a different grade, depending on what the grade boundaries come out with 6 months later. But that's not the same as the moderation process. So surely there needs to be some kind of fluidity between them. Let me know your thoughts on that one. And I thought I was near the end, but it's still going. This is the thing. There's so much information, but it's so kind of really difficult. I don't know whether they need to rewrite it so it's subject specific, but it is really difficult to kind of understand and make sure it's done properly. And and especially it is that most stressful part of the year when you've had your exams, you're trying to mark them and standardise and get all the marks in, and then you've got this on top. So if an external reviewer disagrees with the marking, the centre is obliged to accept the new mark. The reviewer should be instructed to ensure that the candidate's mark is consistent, the centre's marking standard. She is required to correct any marking errors. The 3 types of marking errors are an administration error, a failure to apply the marking criteria to the evidence generated by the candidate, where the failure did not involve the exercise of academic judgment, or an unreasonable exercise of academic judgment. So if the reviewer decides that there has been a marking error, she must indicate where the marking error has occurred and how the mark is not in line with the standard of the other candidates at the centre. It is for the centre to determine whether any difference in marking is within any tolerance and such as the centre will allow during its internal standardisation process. But again, we don't use tolerance within internal standardisation. That's when the moderator comes. The head of the centre will have the final decision if there is any disagreement on the mark to be submitted to the awarding body. The centre must inform the awarding body if it does not accept the outcome. But yet the previous one was talking about sending all the work or getting the person in to look at the work, but it didn't say about looking at the work either side. It just said looking at the person who's put in the review process. So how would the external reviewer know if it's within kind of the range? So will the awarding body request that the work that was reviewed is submitted for moderation? So the awarding body will use its standard sampling system to identify the candidate's work to be submitted for moderation. This may include the candidate's work whose mark was reviewed. But as far as I'm aware, it doesn't. There's no evidence that comes up to show the moderators that it's been reviewed. Can candidates follow up the outcome of the review by producing additional work to improve the mark? That is a definite no. And last one. Where does the legal responsibility lie for the fairness and lawfulness of the marks and the grades? So the centre is responsible for following the regulations and processes set by the awarding body, including those of internal assessment. Any legal changes made against the centre regarding a mark is awarded as part of a qualification should be referred to relevant awarded bodies. However, if the challenge is made before the moderations take place, the complaint will need to wait until the moderation process has been completed. As part of such, the challenge, the awarding body would need to be satisfied the centre follows the correct processes. And I think, again, it's that one, isn't it, where it was in the news. And was it earlier this year that there was a food tech teacher, a few years ago, but the court case only went through and got into the news earlier this year about they brought in extra stuff, and when the kids went for lunch, they changed all of their dishes and photographed them with extra garnish and things like that, and sauces that they had made and changed. And I think obviously that's a process that you're going to raise this kind of thing. I think that's the severity where the kids or the parents need to be. There's something wrong with the way that they're reviewing this and marking this and doing this. That should be what this process is for, not an opportunity to massively confuse these students and confuse teachers and kind of ruin that like end of a 2-year or potentially 5-year, if you've seen them all the way through, process, and make it into this real negative kind of idea is quite disheartening. I mean, I've got some kind of things that people have said in terms of the way they've done theirs. There's messages where people have said, I've spent the day with I've spent the day with numbers of my GCSE students crying over their marks. What a dreadful way to end our time together. I feel awful, but I can't mark what isn't there. Seriously questioning it all. But we also need kind of the other departments to argue it as well. So not just art, even though we hit double whammy because it's all of our subject. Whereas at least if you give the kids their grade for English, for example, for their coursework, they're then going to have an opportunity to improve that in the exam. So it is a slightly different kind of way of doing it. I've got another one that said, I had a few annoyed parents who can't understand why we've marked their talented children with the marks. It just adds to an already stressful time. A colleague at a nearby school and I have swapped reviews on marks for each other, and it feels like quite a few this year are feeling entitled to more than they got, and it's a very unhelpful system. I think this is quite an issue that parents are being protective of their children. They think that they're these little angels that have worked really, really hard and therefore deserve these better marks than what they actually do. And actually they don't realise that when they're at school, they don't work as hard as you think they are. Or they don't understand the context of the course and the fact that they have to experiment and refine. They can't just do a portrait project and have a random elephant in there. That is going to make it a lower mark. They have to flow. It has to show a journey. They can't just do one thing and be able to draw perfectly consistently and copy stuff. They need to show personalization. They need to move away from the artist and actually make it their own and individualize and show that journey. If they're all just doing it in exactly the same way, yes, they might be the most amazing drawing you've ever seen, but it's exactly like that one that they found off Pinterest and they brought into their lesson and decided they were going to do that for their final piece. We've all felt that. But it is potentially parents not understanding the context of the course and how the marks are awarded, and students potentially, we've all had that, haven't they, where they've gone home and, oh, I got given this detention unfairly, like they're potentially thinking that their marks are unfair, that they worked harder than that, they're more talented than that. I remember very early on in my career, gosh, I'm going back probably a good 11, 12 years, having a parents' evening of a kid who got A's across, that's how old I am, because it's not 1 to 9s, who got A's in all their other subjects, but I'd given her a D, and they couldn't understand why she was getting a D in art. And I was like, she literally draws a flower as a circle in the middle with round petals when they're meant to be drawing a hyper-realistic, detailed flower. I'm like, yes, she's ticked everything off the checklist, but she's literally doing it in probably 10 minutes, and they're the most simple things where each task should be taking her a good couple of hours, and it should be hyper realistic and spending time, like, as opposed to drawing very simply like a toddler. It was how I'd probably describe her now with the drawings. Not at the time. That was a very difficult parents' evening. But trying to explain to a parent, whilst their amazing child couldn't get an A and wasn't like on track for an A in art, they did end up going up once they kind of clocked it and understood it. And I remember my head of department coming in and actually went and spoke to them and told me to go get books, and I went and got books, and then he showed them the difference between her book and what an A book looked like, and then they suddenly sunk in and understand. And I guess maybe it is a little bit of that kind of process, as in like, well, here's your book, then look at the books either side and see whether you feel like you're in the right place. Is that the right way to do it? But again, some of these complaints are coming from parents and being pushed through with parents, but actually the children don't really understand what the process is. The parents aren't coming in and being involved in that process. The parents aren't coming in and doing the review. It's the students. So they don't necessarily know what they're looking at and in terms of one or the other, and they haven't got that parent kind of dictating to them. So it's quite an interesting kind of concept. What's this one? We've got they're saying that it's awful, all the admin that we have to do, we have to get their marks to them, and then we've got lots of students suddenly become absent after their exam and they just decide they're only going to come in for revision sessions, emailing parents and triple checking that they've got all their marks, having to chase students and find them, trying to ring home and try and get them to come into school to be able to get them. I mean, and that was just somebody that had 21 students. Somebody else has said they got 80. I mean, I think I had 150 students taking one of the GCSEs in within my department last year. So you can imagine the admin of trying to get that many kids and making sure they've all got their marks and understood it. It's quite complicated. But it is just that and everybody seems to sympathise with everybody, that it's this, and it is that weird thing, because we've got to think of the students as well. We're doing this probably the week before they go into their actual exams. So we need to think about their kind of well-being and thinking about kind of how they're going to take it. If they suddenly get that, don't really understand it, think they've done really badly, then they're going to have that mindset going into their actual exams, and that's going to have a massive negative impact on them. And the same as if it's something simple like they've Googled the wrong grade boundaries, trying to guess what it is, and then they feel really disheartened, because it is the difference. Like I said at the start, my niece saying that she had 175 out of 200, I was like, oh, like looking at that, I think off OCR that's like a 9, and she was like, no, I'm AQA. So I was trying to work out, well, maybe they've written 200 instead of out of 190. What were the two? 96 times 2. Where's my maths teachers at? But either I was like, then if they've accidentally put the wrong underneath number, is that I think would then go to a 7, but I don't want to. That's like quite a big gap. Telling my niece, "Oh, you're on track for a 9 or a 7." That's like it's a 2-grade difference. So it's really confusing. And then plus we don't know what the grade boundaries there are anyway. So we're going to throw a dart and hope for the best when it comes to August. I would love to know what other subjects, whether they go through this kind of lovely drama that is giving art marks. It is like just one of those that the kids who might be disappointed with their marks because they've done very little. It just feels like almost like too little too late, because you're not meant to give them marks, especially with the externally set assignment. You're not meant to give them any marks at any point of that. So they've got you can tell them, oh, you haven't done this, you need to do this, you need to do that. But they don't really realise the impact of that until much later when they actually get the actual mark. It's harsh at the end of the day, as many say you cannot mark what is not there, but personally you've got to play the spec at its own game. So you've got to kind of I like that one, you've got to try and really see it. But if you taught your kids well, I was trying to explain to my students why when I teach them about AO1 and we look at artists, I always find an article, especially earlier on in year 10 for their first like 1 or 2 artists we do together. I find an article about their artist and we go through it and we highlight all the key concepts and then we write about that artist. And I was like, this is how I don't want you to copy out where they were born and where they went to university and what awards they won. I want you to find exactly the concept or an interview with that artist that's them explaining their inspiration and their process that's actually going to inform your practice. For example, like my year 10s, we did Picasso's Weeping Woman, and like learning about the context of the fact that was about the Spanish Civil War. And actually it's quite, even though it's a bright, colourful picture, it's about the fact that it's all about women and children losing loved ones in the war and his upset with what was going on and him refusing to return home with everything that was going on. But the kids, if they just analysed the picture on its own, or they had to do the research on their own, they'd just find out that Picasso was famous for Cubism. It wouldn't go much deeper than that. And it's kind of that, playing the spec at its own game, really being able to kind of understand where to find the marks and how to really help them can make it a lot easier. Because if you're going through it, and I explain that to my students, and especially I changed schools, and they were like, one of the students actually said to me, she's like, she did Vincent van Gogh before I got there, and I was like, oh, so what did you write about Van Gogh? And she was like, oh, well, I just wrote like where he was from and that he was like famous for this mark making and this stuff. And I was like, oh, but did you write about the fact that he didn't sell any artwork before he was famous? Or I think he sold one, that he applied to loads of exhibitions, but he kept getting rejected because he was too much of a new style. He wasn't realistic enough. Did you write about the fact that him and his mate Gauguin had a massive argument, and that was the night he chopped off his ear and ended up in a mental asylum, and actually a lot of his pictures are drawn in his bedroom or looking out that window or drawing the sunflowers because that's all he had around him? And they were like, I didn't know any of that. And I think it's that kind of concept that we want them to really learn in depth about art. We want them to really think about their process and know what it is. But I think I did like that comment about kind of using the spec. If you make it really obvious, then hopefully your kids won't be disappointed. But it is explaining to the kids why they're going into that much context detail. That's how that critical analysis of other sources, that's how you get that in there. And I really do refer to my mark scheme throughout to make it really obvious to the kids throughout the course how they get the marks, so that then this kind of situation isn't as likely to happen. And again, somebody else has commented that if you feel like you've been marked regularly during the coursework, the students know roughly what grade they're getting, therefore it shouldn't be a surprise. But I do find that's a slippery slope. If you're telling the kids like, oh, you're this grade, oh, you're that grade, but we don't know what the grade boundaries are going to be, you don't know how your moderation is going to be, that's a very slippery slope in terms of how they're going to do that. if that makes sense. So it's I feel like telling a kid, oh, that's a grade 4, and the kids all ask me, what's this grade, and what grade am I on, and I'm like, well, I'll try and use the grade boundary wording. So I'm like, oh, you're not quite consistently enough. To get up to the next grade, you need to be consistent. So it needs to be really regularly, or you're not highly developed yet. You need to think about this, this, and this in order to get highly developed, which will take you up to that next band of marks. So I do think we've got to be careful. We don't want to be going, you're going to be this grade, this grade, this grade. And I think that we do have reports, don't we? And we do give kids their grades and what we predict they're going to be. But we want them to use, we need to use that language to be able to support them in doing that. And what else have we got? I think teachers are just generally hating the process. I won't say that one because that one has a swear word in it. But we've got some with looking at their GCSE maths results in August and then complaining versus the other subjects, and then it being too late to be changed. That it's just a horrible process to go through. It's a horrible way to end 2 years of work, and just the terrible timing of it being just before the exams. Somebody here said that they had a stressful day facing parental complaints, and that they're contemplating leaving the teaching job after 40 years. That she trained to do over 40 years ago. And I think that's it. Like, we should be completely respected as educators in our trade, that we know what we're doing. You wouldn't be asking a doctor to give you what they think is wrong with you and then asking somebody to review it before you let them treat you. It's just although with my back, if you've listened to any of my other episodes, I wish I could have done that before my DVT ended up being a pulmonary embolism. But this, and somebody else saying, I feel like there's 12 years of teaching and this has been the worst so far. And also there's quite a lot of people saying that they've swapped schools and they're having to deal with what's left after another teacher that's potentially not taught them as well, or if they've had a series of cover and the kids aren't in a great place. But now when they're saying, then the kids haven't got the mark that they were potentially predicted because that teacher left and they had cover, and the kids have not necessarily worked as hard because they haven't had somebody pushing them. So that is massively affecting and then the new person that's coming gets the brunt of that. I've definitely felt that at different parts of my career. And it's just it's one of those. It's just really difficult. And I think that teaching is really a thankless job. You don't get the parents going, oh, thank you. I really appreciate you getting that grade for my student. Lots of people saying they're really struggling to find the students now that they're not in their art lessons and find them around the school, adding to their workload, when actually I don't know union wise whether it's actually a kind of work wise in that respect, adding to your workload. Surely it's an admin job to go and hand all of these out, but also then it's one of those, if you've taught those kids for that long, you want to be the person giving them their marks. Do you really want to give that to somebody on the admin team and not actually be able to explain it to them and give them the details behind it? Is quite difficult as well. But yeah, so again, somebody said they gave all the ones that were in person. Somebody emailed the rest out and gave the rest a list of raw marks to the examiner, and then let them email them. Again, and somebody has said that they've had an exams officer refuse to do it. So it's just there's no clarity across in terms of what you need to do, what things you need to make sure that in order for the kids to understand what they are kind of asking for in terms of review and what they're asking to be looked at is quite difficult. I'm trying to find some other good ones. But it's it is again like looking at that kind of doing it. It's just really, it feels like we're being questioned as teachers rather than if we've been through the standardization training, we've standardized within the school, then why are they allowed to then kind of question it at that point when they haven't been through moderation? We don't know what the grade boundaries are. It seems to be a lot of stress unnecessarily, really, for students and staff. This one said, after teaching students some for 5 years, so obviously this is they've been teaching them for a long time, being the only subject in the curriculum having to do the reporting of these raw marks leave so many students confused and upset. No teacher supports this process. The current systems lack transparency and fairness, causing unnecessary stress for both students and educators. Being forced to reveal raw marks put educators, students and parents in an uncomfortable position after working so hard to build relationships with students. The process means that teachers' assessment period is shortened, adding extra stress to a heavy workload and a heavy part of the teaching calendar. There seems little, if any, advantage to students having these scores, and many turn to past years' boundaries to make predictions and then get upset with the results. And I completely agree with that. I think that's quite a big part of this, is the fact that we're kind of giving them these marks out of context, that's kind of potentially destroying these lovely relationships that have really grown over the last few years. And it just seems a bit of a shame to kind of add it at that point to that way. I mean, I have seen, I think, I'll give it to somebody. I think there's one person that said that they saw it as not a positive, but saw the positive of it, that they're giving that opportunity to dispute the marks if they haven't followed the kind of process properly. It's right that they have that opportunity to do that. And I do kind of agree in that respect that students should have that opportunity. But I feel it needs to be much clearer guidance. Maybe even art needs to be a separate one to other ones, in the fact that the whole of basically their GCSE is going through this process. And I think what that other person said as well, in terms of the pressure of that point, is really difficult as well. It's that, and the fact that we have to get the moderation, basically it's taken a week off, hasn't it? So it's taken an extra week off, all of us, in terms of getting students to finish their work early so we can moderate early, so we can get the marks to them so they can have a week before they dispute their marks. So essentially, the whole process is making our students get a lower mark because they're losing out on a week's worth of lessons to finish off and do stuff. So there's that point as well. If we want to get pedantic, it's actually negatively impacting their mark as well. Somebody else saying that it's just really wrong to give out the exam mark, as they won't know their actual grade until August. Other people just saying it's crazy when the moderator hasn't even been in to check. I talked about charging before. This person said the school, in their wisdom, has given parents 1 week to read the letter and appeal the process, and it will take a week to appeal, and it will cost £85. So I think, and then other people going, surely you can't charge the appeal. But like I said, I did read it out. It doesn't say that you can't charge them. Somebody else said they're charging £25 from a sixth form, and somebody knows somebody else that's charging £50. I guess that's to cover the costs of having to kind of remark it. It just seems weird. And again, a lot of people saying that they were told kind of 24 hours, 48 hours by an exam board. I was at an exam board standardization training where somebody asked about how long, and they did say as long as it's over 24 hours. But obviously that's now changed, and JCQ says about 5 days, and again cuts into that marking time. This person says they've read all the different comments about the giving the raw marks. However, they'd like to give a different perspective on the debate. Before approaching JCQ and signing petitions, let's not overlook that this is the only point at which an individual candidate can appeal their mark. After results are issued, there is no individual appeal. A centre can appeal, but only if a moderation has resulted in a change of marks for the whole cohort. We're all professionals and all work hard to assess correctly and without bias, but I'm sure we'd all agree that anyone in any assessment scenario should have a right to appeal if they believe a mistake or an injustice has been done. There is a solution to the whole situation, but only one that makes it examined. As an examined qualification, either part or whole appeals in August would be possible, and the teacher-student relationship would remain undetained. So that's, again, what I said. I feel like they can only contest it. We'd have to have the whole cohort remarked if anything goes wrong in August. So is it that we need to change that so they can contest individual marks in August if they do feel that they haven't been marked appropriately? And then maybe it's one of those, if we then look into it, the process, and that child was not selected for moderation or was not part of the moderation sample or didn't go to that stage of moderation, so their book was not looked up for by moderators, should that child have the opportunity to contest and just have theirs remarked? But obviously that's going to be a lot, because art and stuff is a lot different. Then the moderators have to go back out to that centre, so you're paying moderators to go out and visit. Or is there now a day and age? Obviously, photography has moved more onto digitally, so they could send it to moderators to be reviewed. I believe that's what we did, if I remember right. My brain's gone a bit. COVID, we took photos and digitally sent them for moderation. So maybe that's what we did. I don't think we did it as a mass, but I know that there were certain bits that did get sent off. So maybe we had that opportunity that if kids want to individually dispute their marks in August, centres can photograph their work and send them to be moderated online. Maybe that's the solution. It just feels really kind of unfair on staff and students, especially, and it just feels like the art. Somebody called me at school, we're second-hand citizens, us art teachers, in the fact that we wouldn't be doing this if it was one of the other subjects, that running around trying to find students. So, and I think it's one of those, if we give them the raw marks, is it that we're implying that they should, we're encouraging this whole process, does it encourage an appeal? But if a teacher is given the proper training, given the time to actually do their marking, then there shouldn't be an issue. And on top of this, you had the examiner coming in to look at the marking anyway. Otherwise, why do we need that? Why do we need that extra layer with something that somebody said? What else have we got? We've got a few more minutes. If you've got anything that you've been through or done, then do feel free to message. And again, it is that kind of thing of just making it more teacher and student friendly so that they can understand it a bit more. Somebody said here about, I'm wondering if some of this is about the culture of fear that so many work in, and so model very unhealthily stance that we can't be questioned or wrong or open to admitting to learning from our mistakes. So I do think there's that bit of that, but I guess that's why we have the moderator coming in to double check. I know that moderator reports as well, I feel like they've got better over the last few years in having more feedback in terms of what departments should potentially look at improving and what they've done well. I do think that's a whole nother show, talking about the moderation process and kind of getting students and kind of involved in knowing how to improve the students' work and what the moderators are seeing. Because for anybody that's listening that's not an art teacher, basically the moderator goes in, you kind of talk them through the work in terms of what they've been taught in terms of concepts, and then they leave the room, the moderator marks the marks. As long as they're within tolerance, they will then basically leave, and that is it. You do not get told anything, and then in August you get a report to say whether you were in tolerance or out of tolerance, maybe a bit lenient, maybe not. And that's kind of it. But we need kind of, I think, as teachers, a bit more information to help us. Then that's, again, going to help this reduce reviews if we are actually given proper feedback from the exam boards in terms of what students and kind of are doing right or wrong, or what as cohorts they're doing, or the way that this course is structured would be kind of interesting. But I do think it is one of those that it is changing. We are more in a society that does like a moan and does like a complain. So is that kind of leading to more of this? So somebody else says that marking and moderation has developed. Not least the number of art and design teachers in a department has reduced, with most departments being half the size of teams compared to 10, 15 years ago. So we know that our subjects are being reduced. Obviously, that means that we've got less of us marking. We're giving less time off timetable to mark, so making marking accurate becomes more difficult. And unless you've got a really good school that really supports the internal moderation process, it can be challenging. And again, not being allowed to go to standardization events or only being allowed to do online ones, again, makes it more difficult to make sure you're being accurate. But this person said, but it's worth remembering as part of the wider debate that back in the early 80s, before A-levels was sent away for marking and moderation, it can be done, but de-skills art and design teachers. So do we go back to that? Do we go back to the 80s and we send all of the works off to be assessed elsewhere? That would be a bit of a pressure on the Royal Mail. Can you imagine the havoc of the number of people that would have their GCSE or A-level art projects lost through the post? It would be horrific. But it is just that kind of thing. It is, like you said, if this is here to stay, you have to make sure, A, that your school has a review policy in place. Then you've got to make sure you've got an internal moderation process in place, that you're attending the standardization, and keep your materials, print out the materials online, and you use them when you're moderating. So moderate with those and previous years, and use the notes and comment section to say, this is similar to this set of work from the standardization materials. That's going to support as well, if they do review it, the kids being able to go, oh yeah, my work is similar to that. And I think it's really unfair that we're kind of put in this position where it's a negative thing on what can be this beautiful kind of course where we have these really amazing kind of connections with kids. And we shouldn't forget that it is our subject is one of the best subjects. We get this amazing opportunity to get students to really show off what they can do, what they're capable of, and build their confidence. And I think we don't want it to be this place where they negatively kind of leave a situation, and don't forget everything that they've achieved in the process and everything they've learned. It should be this kind of positive kind of thing. It shouldn't be a negative experience. But like I said, if you NSEAD, the art union, they've got a survey out at the moment. So if you are interested in this or want to try and I think they're pushing to get this process changed or have some more clarity, they've got links on their Facebook group, or I believe it was in their newsletter if you're signed up to that. So do if you want to have a go at filling that out, because it would be interesting to see how this is going to change. It would be nice that as our educators, I think the majority of us have found this a difficult process. Even if the process is here to stay, it would certainly be nice to have a little bit more clarity of how to do it, so it doesn't affect teacher well-being and certainly doesn't affect student well-being. We don't want to stress out students just before they go into their full-on exams in the exam hall. We don't want them to have a negative impact on that. I feel like August is a hard enough day for them as it is, without having it a random pre-day version of that in May, just before they kind of buckle down. And I think it is that whole thing, isn't it, that we can't give them context. We don't know what their marks are going to be. We don't know what the grade boundaries are going to be. We don't know what the moderator is going to do. So it is just this really difficult kind of murky water. And especially I'm well over a decade into teaching, and I find this complicated, and I've had to really read through it and make sure I'm really giving the correct advice to people and to the students. So I can only imagine if you're a new student, a new teacher, or you're a single headed department teacher, or if you're a new head of department, this is something that's quite a lot to take on and quite difficult to understand. So you're more than welcome to reach out and I'll help and talk you through it. Or hopefully at least this podcast will have maybe talked you through it and talked through the ins and outs rather than you having to read that beautiful, God knows how many page document by JCQ that was a little bit on the vague side, but how I interpreted it as a head of art and how I feel we can do it in the fact that we can present it to the kids and the parents so that they don't feel misinformed. They don't feel this is the opportunity to be like, well, my kid is a better kid than that, they deserve higher, and start and end on that argument. It's the opportunity to correct it, present it well enough, explain exactly the process that you've been through so they can't debate it, and making sure that your SLT has something in place to review these marks if there's issues with it. But if you've enjoyed this, I would suggest potentially not reading the JCQ document and just listening to this, and maybe spend your time better spent maybe reading a lovely John Catt book, who is one of our great sponsors that should back. I'm like so excited that they're back, and we've got a discount code as well. So we're in partnership with John Catt Educational. They publish amazing professional development books and resources, and to be fair, we interview a lot of their authors, and if you go back through the archives you can find some great ones. So if you're not sure about a book, have a little check on our website and see whether you can find one of their shows. Maybe you want to have a listen to that, and then that might convince you to read the book. That's certainly how I do it. So you can go onto their website, johncattbookshop.com, to look at the full range of titles, and you can use the code JCTTR2425 and get 20% off your order. So happy reading. We've also got Reading Solutions UK, who are looking for the best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers. Join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. So only around the corner. Hear from specialist speakers like TV personality and educational expert Basit Siddiqui and beloved children's author Michael Rosen and the National Literacy Trust Irene Picton. Throughout the 3-day conference, speakers will explore a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Visit Reading Solutions website at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk to get your free ticket, to mention that. And Easy For You is empowering educations with Easy For You, where innovation meets accessibility. Their subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionises the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. Easy For You isn't just providing tools, they're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdening the limitations. So Easy For You, transforming education one device at a time. And you can find out more at www.easyforyou.school. And talking of which, tomorrow we've got another great show, Tackling Digital Poverty, over here on Spaces at 8 p.m. So that's well worth a listen. So pop that into your calendar. Thank you so much for those of you that have joined me and listened throughout today's show, or if you're listening back online, thank you very much for enjoying it. Please get in contact if you want to chat about it more, and maybe we'll see this time next year where we're at with that. So thank you so much for listening. Enjoy your evening.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.